to the First Church in Chestnut Hill for our June 7th, 2020 service. Welcome if it's your first time with us, welcome if it's your 100th time. Also, feel free to share the link that got you here to the service if you enjoyed it. Now for our readings. First is a selection from Psalm 8. O Lord, our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. Out of the mouths of babes and infants you have founded a bulwark because of your foes, to silence the enemy and the avenger. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established, what are human beings that you are mindful of them, mortals that you care for them, that you have made them a little lower than God and crowned them with glory and honor. The next reading is from the book of Genesis, chapter 1, from verse 29 to chapter 2, verse 3. God said, I see I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit, and you shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all their multitude. And on the seventh day God finished the work that he had done. And he rested on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. So ends the reading. What did we hear? So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. God rested. It sounds like a great idea. After all that work, all that effort, time to rest. Wouldn't it be nice? But it's not that simple for the rest of us. I was ordained 11 years ago, give or take. And prior to that, I was in seminary for 3 years. And over that 14 years of training in ministry, I had never once suffered from writer's block. I might have taken a little longer some weeks than others, but eventually I would figure out what to put down. I would spend some time pondering the readings, maybe go for a drive, root around in my mental attic for some of the weird stuff I store up there for just such an emergency. Throw in a story, tie it up in a nice bow with a resounding moral message. My work here is done. And then came this particular week. This week, in this month, in this year of years. What do I do with all of this? What do I do with rioting and looting amidst national protests about the treatment of African Americans? What do I do with police brutality inflicted against people of color that has been going on since before I was born, since before any of you were born, since before this country was born? What do I do with chaos in the streets and chaos in the halls of government? What do I do with the suggestion that the military should, for some reason, be sent out across the United States to impose law and order when some of those very representatives of the law have been videotaped initiating the disorder? Oh, and lest we forget the global pandemic, record unemployment, and a plummeting economy. Busy week. What do we do with all that? I don't know. I don't know at all. Maybe I should know, but I don't. There's no end to the opinions flying around, the reports being made, the videotape coming from all over the world. There's no end of accusations of bad behavior and bad actors, of new rumors and very old conspiracies. And there's no time to reflect on any one of those developments before the next one just boils over. There is too much, too fast, too often. Can't we just turn it all off? Change the channel? There's so much going on. There are so many terrible things going on. Can't we get a bit of rest for once? God took a day of rest. God took a day of rest after 7 days' work. God looked upon creation and declared that it was good. So you might say that he had deserved a well-earned rest. The question then being, do we deserve a rest? And what, in fact, have we created? This week, George Floyd was murdered. We know this. It was not a close call. It's not a, well, let's wait to see the final report kind of situation. Police chiefs and law enforcement experts across the country have said as much. George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis while he was handcuffed to the ground. It happened due to a nearly 9-minute-long chokehold imposed by a police officer who is visibly not in fear for his life or concerned about the safety of others. There's not a lot of argument about this, except maybe in the Minneapolis police community and in a few corners of the media. But now the bad guy, he's been charged. Why doesn't everyone just go home? Why doesn't everyone just calm down? Why is there such turmoil? Why? Excuse me. Because George Floyd is only one example. There are many others. There is Breonna Taylor. She was murdered in her own apartment in Louisville, Kentucky. She was shot when the police burst in without any warning because they mistakenly believed something illegal was going on in her home. It wasn't. There was Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia, who was murdered while he was jogging. He was killed by a father and son team, and that crime only saw the light of day because it got videotaped. What do I do about these 3 horrible events which are only the most recent examples of African Americans dying in their homes, out for a jog, while in police custody? These are the ones we see. These are the ones that get into the news. How do you imagine that every single one of them got videotaped? No. How many of them do we not know about? How often does this happen when we don't have a shred of visual evidence? You may have heard about Amy Cooper, a white woman from Central Park in New York City. She had been asked to put her dog on a leash by an African-American man whose name was Christian Cooper, no relation. The man had been out birdwatching. He was in the right, she was in the wrong, but she threatened to call the police on the man, and then did so, completely misrepresenting the encounter and placing the man's life in danger. Why in danger? Recall that another African-American man named Eric Garner was choked to death on the streets of New York. He was selling loose cigarettes on a street corner. It was ruled homicide by the coroner, but the grand jury refused to even indict the officer. Allegedly threatening a woman in the park would have triggered perhaps at least as vigorous a response. The Amy Cooper incident may have been what precipitated the George Floyd protests, if that seems possible. Why? Because it became momentarily impossible for white folks around the nation to declare that violence against black folks is simply random or unintentional. It is often premeditated. It is often to kill a mockingbird calculated to shift the blame, to avoid repercussions, to make someone else suffer. To make them suffer because you have the power to do so and they don't have the power to stop it. Christian Cooper was very fortunate because he did everything exactly right and he had a camera going all the while. Not everyone is so lucky. There was an expression about things being decided somewhere in a smoke-filled room. It's a proverbial place where decisions gets made, where those in charge will hammer out what's supposed to happen next. Have you ever been in that room? Maybe you weren't deciding the fate of the free world, but perhaps you were deciding something. Perhaps you were listening as others decided something, while others said certain things while they were offering up their unvarnished opinions about who gets hired, about who gets fired, about who gets the recommendation, the promotion, about who gets to be in our club. Maybe it was something less dramatic than that. Maybe it was just an off-color story, an ethnic or a racial joke. Haha, all in fun. Have a sense of humor. Buck up. Why make a big deal out of this? It's not worth the fuss. Put another way, it's not worth placing oneself in the uncomfortable position of saying out loud to a friend, to a colleague, to a boss, to a relative, that what you said was racist, it was bigoted, it was prejudiced. Can't we just have a nice dinner together? Can't we just have a little bit of rest? Some peace and quiet? Well, who gets to enjoy that peace? And who has to stay quiet to make it possible? In all likelihood, George Floyd's murderer will go to jail. Perhaps Ahmaud Arbery's killers will also face justice, we don't know. But tragically, Breonna Taylor will probably die without any consequences. The police made a mistake, it was just a mistake. And yet when a person of color makes a mistake, they risk death. Even when they don't make a mistake and they're just out bird watching or jogging or shopping or simply existing, they might pay for that decision with their lives. Over the years, I've seen people get away with things because of who they are rather than whether they are innocent. I've seen people get a job because of who they knew rather than because of anything they had done to deserve it. I have seen people not get a job because they were not quite the right fit, when the primary issue of fitness was one of race, gender, or disability. Little of this is said openly. There is often some vague excuse, some pretext for why this person would not be just right for the position, for the promotion, for the whatever. Say just enough to be understood without getting yourself into hot water. Good life advice. In those moments, it never seems to be enough to question the decision. It's never enough for someone to speak out, to speak up. I was having a conversation the other day with an old friend. And we do not agree about matters social or political. And not surprisingly, we got into a discussion about current events. How do you avoid that these days? We went back and forth, protests versus riots, police brutality versus law and order, right-wing agitators versus left-wing anti-fascists. Round and round and round. It was like dueling banjos using National Public Radio and Fox News. And then came the question of kneeling. Kneeling in the protest versus kneeling for the national anthem. such a charged verb these days. And that was the flashpoint of the conversation. My friend bluntly said that it was never acceptable to kneel during the national anthem. And he was quite upset about this. He was quite agitated over the matter. And this is usually where you stop, you move on, call it a day. But I didn't do so in this instance. I asked him a hypothetical question. You are up in heaven, waiting to be born. Yes, I realize it's a weird hypothetical question. So you're up there, waiting to be born, and while you're waiting, someone gives you the chance to choose who you might be when you're born. And if that were the case, I asked my friend, would you, right now, in this moment of American history, choose to be born African American? My friend is white, and he thought about it for a moment. He was quiet. And then he said no, he wouldn't make that choice. To which I responded, that's why there are protests. And that's why some people are kneeling. There's nothing most of us can do to stop police brutality, but there are some things that we can do to reduce the capacity for such brutality. Some police departments around the country now have armored personnel carriers and other military surplus equipment. We have control over that. Some police departments train their officers to fight terrorists, but they don't train them to de-escalate moments of domestic violence or to manage people who have mental illnesses. We have control over that. There have even been calls to abolish the police, an idea I do not accept as either likely or terribly constructive. I prefer to think of the problem this way. We are asking the police to do work that they have never been expected to do before. Like school teachers who now shoulder all the nation's social problems in the classroom, police officers are being asked to make war when they have historically been expected to keep the peace. This has been described as the distinction between the warrior and the guardian. The military is the home for our nation's warriors, while the police should be the home for our community's protectors. Those are different jobs. And those are such different jobs that they deserve different expectations and very different training. But that's not enough. The police are often acting upon the expectations of the society that they serve. On that level, it's unfair to accuse the police of doing the wrong things if they're being asked over and over again to do those very things. Amy Cooper was asking the police to do the wrong thing. When someone calls the police on the black UPS driver because he stands out in the neighborhood, they're asking the police to do the wrong thing. The police become the instrument of prejudice rather than its source. And that all begins somewhere, in some smoke-filled room, or no smoke. It begins in the office, it begins in the boardroom, it begins when you're out for a couple of drinks, it begins at the kitchen table. It begins with offhand comments we make, the jokes we tell, the decisions we make every day. It begins when we decide that someone does not fit into our little corner of the world. And it continues because the other people around do not say anything about it. Our opening piece of music, I hope you heard, was Let There Be Peace on Earth. I remember hearing that in church when I was growing up. It goes, let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. It's a hopeful idea. It's a prayer, really. And it's interesting in that way because it's entirely within our control. It's not in God's control. Our peacefulness is a function of our choices, our decisions, our personal restraint. Now someone might respond, well, if it's in our control, then why is there rioting? Why is there looting? Why not require everything to calm down first, and then we'll take some steps? I don't mean to defend looting or rioting in any way at all, but I would observe that expecting one group of people to be endlessly patient and peaceful is a lot to ask. That setting preconditions before society will take action to address injustice is itself unjust. And if we're unwilling to call out people who make racist remarks or prejudicial decisions in our lives, then how do we expect the people who are the targets of those remarks and those decisions to do nothing? Rioting is illegal, looting is illegal, and choking someone to death is illegal. Many manifestations of racism are already illegal, and yet society does not seem terribly eager to fix what is broken. I began by saying, I don't know what to say. And I somehow managed to say a lot of things after that, but I don't have a good answer to what is really the question. What do we do now? I don't know who's supposed to go first. I don't know which step to take now and which step to take later. I do not know the best way to address in this moment 4 centuries of uninterrupted racial discrimination. No one told me that in school. We can only begin with ourselves. And we need to begin with ourselves because there is a lot that needs to change. I don't have a handy checklist. I don't have a prepared speech for the next decade or so of social change. But I do know that this has been going on for a long time. None of us started it, but none of us have been able to finish it either. So we need to get to work. God rested when he looked out upon creation and declared that it was good. We're not there yet. None of what we see in our nation right now seems terribly good. So we do not have the right to rest, even if we're weary, even if we're sick and tired of it all. We can take a breather once it starts getting better, perhaps, but we can only truly rest when it is finally good. So, my friends, let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with us. So ends the sermon. The sermon. Let us end in prayer. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me so love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen. Our service is ended. May our service to God and to one another never truly end. Be well, be safe, and God bless you all. Amen.